All right, welcome. Today we're diving into a really compelling story about a simple herbal tea that, according to our source material, sparked a decades-long war. It's a story about ancient wisdom, a truly dedicated nurse, and a system that saw a major threat in a cure that just couldn't be bought or sold. This is the story of Essiac tea.
So, the source for this explainer frames the entire story around this one powerful idea. It says of the woman who carried this formula for decades, she understood that this was not tea. This was an ancestral gift. And that one line, it changes everything. We're not just talking about some health remedy here. We're talking about a sacred legacy.
To really get what this tea is all about, we've got to start at the source. We have to go back to the people who were its original keepers, the Ojibwe tribe.
Now, our source describes the Ojibwe as one of North America's largest native nations. But they weren't just herbalists. They were wisdom keepers. They lived from and literally prayed with the land. For them, plants were like holy scripture. And get this, their leaders weren't chosen from force, but by their wisdom and their ability to heal. This deep spiritual connection to nature, well, it's the foundation of this entire story.
So here's where it all kicks off. Over a century ago, an Ojibwe medicine man comes across a woman who is dying from cancer. He gives her a tea, a specific blend made from 4 herbs. And, the source tells us, she made a complete recovery. To us, that might sound like a miracle, but to the tribe, it was just nature doing its work.
So the big question is, what was actually in this tea? Our source details the 4 sacred herbs, and it makes it very clear, this wasn't just some random mix. Each plant had a very specific and powerful purpose.
Okay, let's break this natural formula down. First up, you've got burdock root, which they called the blood purifier. Think of it as a deep cleaner for your whole system. Next, there's sheep sorrel, known as the warrior herb, which was believed to help break down things in the body that just don't belong there. Then you have slippery elm bark, the healer, used to soothe and calm the stomach and gut. And finally, Indian rhubarb root, the mover, a cleansing herb that helps the body expel waste. A 4-part team, all working together in harmony.
But this ancestral gift didn't stay within the tribe. It was passed on to a Canadian nurse named Renee Kais, and she would end up dedicating her entire life to this formula.
So years after her own healing, the woman who received the tea from the Ojibwe medicine man passed the formula on to Nurse Case. She begged her to use it to help other people. Case took on this mission, and to protect the formula and herself, she gave the tea a name. She simply spelled her last name, Case, backward. E-S-S-I-A-C, Essiac.
And let me tell you, her dedication was just absolute. She treated thousands of patients, a lot of them for free. It actually got to the point where doctors, who couldn't publicly support her, started sending their patients to her in secret. Hospitals invited her to collaborate. And of course, the pharmaceutical companies came knocking, trying to buy the formula. She turned down every single offer. And her refusal to sell out, well, according to our source, that was an unforgivable act in the eyes of the establishment. This is what marked the beginning of what the source calls the war on Essiac.
Our source really captures this turning point with one simple, powerful line. The moment she refused to sell the formula, the war began. Her mission to heal people for free had just crashed head-on into a system built on ownership and profit.
So you can really see the 2 sides of this conflict laid out, right? On one hand, you have Renee Case's actions. She invited doctors to come watch. She submitted data to labs. She treated her patients openly, and she would not sell the formula. And on the other hand, you have the system's response, as detailed in our source: delay tactics, flat-out dismissal of her data, raids on her clinic, and eventually even threats of imprisonment. It was a clear pattern of escalating pressure.
And this is where the story gets really wild. Our source highlights this huge contradiction. While Essiac was being publicly called quackery, the very same doctors who were dismissing it were privately sending their own patients to her. Publicly dismissed, but privately feared.
So that's the big question, isn't it? Why? Why was this simple tea met with such fierce resistance? This last part of our explainer digs into the source's answer, why Essiac just could not be allowed.
The first reason, and maybe the most important of all, it could not be owned.
It wasn't invented in some lab. It came from the land. It was indigenous wisdom passed down through generations.
And get this, it cost pennies to make. Our source argues that this directly threatened a medical system built on hugely expensive treatments.
And finally, It empowered people. It gave them a sense of control, a direct connection to their own healing, completely outside of the established system.
This quote from the source really seems to capture Renee Case's unwavering integrity. What does it befit a man to gain the world and sell their soul? In the end, she chose to protect the gift, not to profit from it.
And so, this story, as it's told by our source, leaves us all with a pretty provocative and essential question to think about. When healing costs pennies, who pays the price?